Okay, Alyson is going to introduce herself.
Yes. Thank you for staying and not running away. Tim Kelly and me, Alyson Morris, and with a little bit of help from one of our students, Matt Barton, are going to discuss the virtues of the virtual. And we're going to just give you a sort of brief talk about what we're doing digitally for creative writing. We're doing quite a lot digitally for creative writing because obviously the subject lends itself to that. But what we're going to do is we're going to give you a 15-minute video which is going to introduce what we do. Now, we have recorded this digitally, of course, because, you know, this is about digital online, it's about creative writing online. So Tim has recorded this. Last year we briefly introduced creative writing and blogging. I did a lot of the talking then, so I think this is a little bit about Tim getting his own back and projecting his Yorkshire accent. We're talking about voice here. Projecting his voice here for our purposes, just for 15 minutes. Then I'm going to do a bit of talking, and we're going to also discuss a little bit about our digital projects from the very people we experiment on as students. So first of all, I think, are we ready?
We'll try it. I may have to adjust the volume, so let's see if it works.
Yes.
I must say we will be updating some of this information at the end, face to face.
My name's Tim Kelly, and I teach, along with my colleague Alyson Morris, on the new BA in English and Creative Writing. This automated multimedia presentation describes some of the work we've been doing to digitise teaching and learning. The digitisation of creative writing can be divided into the following areas. There's been the introduction of a blended approach to teaching delivery with an increasing number of lectures offered online rather than face-to-face. At the same time, students have engaged in new modes of individual and collaborative practice involving not only virtual learning but also digital coursework and assessment. I'll start by talking about the digitisation of teaching. This primarily relates to the introduction of the virtual lecture into a number of creative writing modules via the online video lecture or the online multimedia slideshow presentation. I'll also say something at the end of this talk about the virtual workshop, but for now, let's go to the virtual lecture. The most obvious substitute for the face-to-face lecture is the video lecture. This is perhaps the easiest in some respects, though can be tricky in others. Let's take a look at an example from the 251 Dell module, the short story workshop. Now my talk will consist of 4 parts. First I'll talk about character, then about language, thirdly about narrative form, and finally about the themes or concerns of King's fiction in general. Before I begin, I'll give you a brief synopsis of the story for those of you unfortunate enough to be unfamiliar with Suffer the Little Children. Now, this is easiest in that you are probably doing what comes naturally to the academic, talking, this time to a camera rather than to a group of people, so your practice doesn't change a great deal. And why then, whilst this is the most obvious and simplest, is this also the trickiest? Well, if you were to do this yourself without help, you need a little knowledge of filmmaking or video production. Note the fact that the subject is nicely lit, the composition of the frame fairly well balanced, and you'll have noticed the incorporation of additional elements in the clip, such as intertitles. You need to be familiar with video editing software if you want to add titles and pictures and so forth, and these are elements which improve the watching and learning experience for your students. So the use of video is not for everybody. So what can pretty much anybody do? And forgive me those of you who do this kind of thing already, it's probably very obvious to you. Well, another thing we've done this year is something anyone can do who uses PowerPoint slides in their lectures, and that is to turn them into automated multimedia presentations by the addition of audio voiceovers. You simply prepare your lecture and your slides and then record your voice directly into PowerPoint. And you, of course, are watching such a presentation now. Nevertheless, I'll show you an example from a module on which I teach cinema aesthetics. What follows are the first few slides from a lecture on a film I showed to the students, American Beauty. Ethics, fantasy and red roses. Mise en scène in American Beauty. In this mini lecture, I'll talk very briefly about some of the major thematic elements in American Beauty. These include parental responsibility and the nature of family relationships, sexuality and the function of fantasy in structuring desire, and what it means to make an ethical choice and to be a hero. To do this, and in order for you to get a handle on how important seemingly small stylistic components can be in making sense of a film, I'll talk about these themes through the prism of mise en scène, and I'll restrict my discussion to one component of mise en scène, setting. And within this, I'll narrow the focus still further to the colour red, and in particular to red as it appears as one element of the set, the red rose. So I'm talking about a subcomponent of a subcomponent of a subcomponent, something quite small but nevertheless significant. Now, the rose has traditionally been a symbol of love in Western and Near Eastern cultures, and the colour red is the colour of blood, is associated with sexuality and desire, and for the flawed protagonist of the film, Lester Burnham, the red rose, carrying all these connotations, is linked with two of the women in his life. Most obviously, the rose is linked with Angela, his daughter Jane's friend, who is the subject of Lester's midlife crisis fantasy. But it's also linked with Lester's wife, Caroline, and indeed at the beginning of the film, when we're introduced to Caroline, she is holding a red rose. So Lester's sexuality is linked to both women, as you would expect. The fact that Lester is married to Caroline means he was once attracted to her, and he is still attracted to her, as you see at certain moments in the film, despite his obsession with the teenage Angela. However, let's take a look at the scenes in which the two women are introduced and notice the differences. Let's not. Now, the objection to this kind of virtual activity is, of course, that there's not the same opportunity for interaction, questions and so forth, that there is in the face-to-face scenario. Though this is plainly true, I'd just say two things about this. The lecture is only one mode of teaching delivery. The option for interaction comes afterwards in the seminar or workshop that follows. I always start the face-to-face session following a virtual lecture with a little recap on the lecture and invite questions from the students. Secondly, as someone who once did a little work on lectures, who spent a number of years filming academic speech events, initially for the EASE software, which morphed into the British Academic Spoken English corpus, then this notion that lectures are an interactive form is a spurious one. Large-scale lectures remain pretty much what they've always been, a top-down or teacher-led form of information transfer. So, I've talked about the digitization of teaching delivery. I'll just say something briefly about the digitization of creative writing from the learner's point of view. So I'll consider the use of writers' group blogs and then point you in the direction of some online picture books my colleague, Alyson Morris, has been developing. On our new degree in English and Creative Writing, we firstly asked the students to form writers' groups. The writers' groups then created blogs, and these could be collaborative group blogs or individual blogs. Their blogs were then used as a method to display their coursework assignments, poetry and prose, critiques, commentaries and travel articles. We found that students weren't just using the blogs for coursework assignments, but were in fact writing lots of other creative pieces there as well. When it came to assessment time, many students had to email us to tell us which of their numerous poems and stories they were entering for assessment. One student said, "What I like about blogging is that it's accessible everywhere and for everyone. We can share our writing with teachers and fellow students. Another nice thing about using blogs is that we open up the things we do in a closed workshop. We can show the world, friends, family." And a first-year student said, "Sharing some of your work online can be a great way to receive constructive feedback, to network, and potentially to gain readers. For example, the collaborative blog Stereotopical invited me to write an article for them after reading some of the posts on my own blog." I should also mention my colleague, Alyson Morris, who worked with first-year undergraduates on picture book stories for children. These were created using presentation software such as PowerPoint and Prezi. The plan is to make the picture books available for use in local primary schools. We made a change to our Writing for the Theatre module this year. It became Writing for the Theatre and Radio. I ran the radio drama strand and made this fully digital. Students wrote and produced their own short radio dramas and made an audio commentary. The coursework submission was an MP3 file. Not only was coursework non-paper based, but it was non-text based. There was no written element to the submission. Assessment was done virtually and feedback and grading provided via Moodle. Now, a legitimate critical response to this might be, so what? So what if there's no paper? So what if there's no text? Being fully digital does not confer any special status on a course, nor make it better than a more traditional one. And I would fully endorse this point of view. I am simply making reference to this course in the context of digital media as one of the grand challenges of research strategy, and see the radio drama strand as an experiment in digitality, and non-text-based coursework submissions as an alternative possibility to traditional practice. So, to bring us back to the title of this presentation, what are the virtues of the virtual? Well, the research by Richardson, Chang and Yang, Williams and Jacobs, Oravec, Daly, Robertson and many others into self-directed learning, blogging and digital literacy suggests a whole host of benefits to students. These include benefits for shy students who have difficulty relating in face-to-face situations, the ability to gain a public audience via blogs, the imperative, particularly for our creative writing students, to proofread work more carefully, the opportunity to share work, to provide and receive feedback and to learn from peers, the ability to access not just a national but an international audience and develop international relationships. There are benefits to students too numerous to mention, but you can check out the references section if you want to know more about this. And whilst extolling the benefits for the students, let's not forget the poor teacher who might spend a great deal of time developing virtual materials. What are the benefits for us? Well, the obvious one is less time in class. No matter how much we love our students and love teaching, I think there are very few of us who would be hypocritical enough to reject the benefit of this. And secondly, we can avoid what I'll call the lecture nightmare. Now, indulge me for a moment and imagine the scene. You're standing in a lecture hall, 100, 200, maybe 300 people waiting on your every word, when your memory fails you and you stumble over what to say next, or you realise you're talking nonsense but carry on regardless. You're stuttering and the fracturing of your syntax, communicating both to yourself and to your students, finally begun to take notice just at the wrong moment that something's amiss. Or you realise your notes are in the wrong order, or the technology fails, or some clever boy, some clever student points out the essential flaw in your argument. Whatever it is, it must have happened to us at some moment in our professional lives. The embarrassing silence, the lacuna, the moment when it finally dawns on us that we have absolutely nothing worthwhile to say. And in this dark night of the academic soul, we are forced publicly to stare open-mouthed into the abyss of our own ineptitude. So, a prime virtue of the virtual is that you can ensure greater quality and control over your teaching, and you can avoid the lecture nightmare. As for the future, we are intending to go fully virtual on the lecture component of our short story workshop module. In order to ensure students watch these lectures online, we won't simply ask questions in the workshop, but we require students to complete online quizzes as follow-up. The quizzes will contain basic comprehension questions on the lecture and will be marked automatically in Moodle as part of student assessment. Another question for the future is whether or not to create a fully virtual creative writing module. From the teacher's point of view, this would involve the development of not just virtual lectures, but virtual interactive workshops. I've experimented with these this year by combining a virtual presentation with a task sheet of activities for students. And if we go down this route, we would need to utilise interactive communication technology, email, online chat, Skype, and in my subject area, online writers groups, blogs, and so forth. A virtual space, in other words, for virtual learners. I realise, of course, this may be problematic, but I'll no doubt report back at some future stage on the successes and failures of this. Here's a bit about me. And here's something about Alyson. And here are a few references.
Okay, and no one's gone to sleep. I'd just like to say that with Tim using the virtual lectures, this year he did bring
2 minutes
the quizzes into... Sorry?
Got 2 minutes left.
Oh, right, yes. Did bring the quizzes into the classroom. There were a few ups and downs, but generally they were quite well received, and we did note an increase in attendance. Is that right?
Yeah, we got about 93% engagement with the video lectures, the online video lectures, because they were followed up by assessed quizzes, so students had to watch them in order to get coursework marks. So that was obviously a big improvement on the face-to-face lectures. I mean, a massive improvement.
What was interesting is that the quizzes were offered up to, they had to finish the quiz by midnight that night, is that right? At midnight there was a certain deadline to
At a
complete the
24-hour
quiz.
period, yeah.
Right, well the external examiner thinks that you should bring them into the first,
Yes,
the workshop, so that they have to do it there and then, at 100% attendance then. But
That's what I'm afraid of.
Yes. So it's been an interesting process. I have got some quotes that students kindly gave us as in their responses to these virtual lectures and quizzes. But we actually have a student here, Matt. I didn't really want to put him on the spot, but what was your reaction really to a virtual lecture and responding to a quiz? Did you enjoy it, or?
This is intimidating.
It's one of those shy one who prefers the virtual.
Yes.
I thoroughly enjoyed them, to be honest. Just watching this sort of quizzes from a very personal place, such as your own home and all that kind of thing, and then being able to just fill out the quizzes and having that gap as well. So you could watch the lecture a couple of times. You could go over it yourself, make notes yourself without having to worry about sort of a teacher just sort of coming up and go, so what have you learned? Come on, tell me. It gave you just some more time to absorb it, really, I guess, instead of the sort of somebody just moving on to the next point and you've lost that point because you're busy focusing on this next one. It had flaws, but it was a very new thing, as we were told, and you could definitely see the benefits of it.
Thank you. One student enjoyed reading or looking at the lecture from her bed, and
She certainly improved in her engagement. We
she
won't mention any
improved in
names.
her engagement. That's right.
Because she could watch them from bed, she said.
Yes, I mean we had a lot of the comments that we had were really Matt has just explained to you. Here it is. I personally enjoy the online virtual lectures. It's actually easier to engage and take in information, especially as it's all from the comfort of your bed. It's also easier to make notes because you can rewind and pause it to write a note of something you didn't really understand or hear properly, like you said. It's short and precise. You pick up the main important things you should know, and doing the quizzes afterwards also helps to cement exactly what you've learnt from class. So there's some very positive feedback there. Because we haven't got an awful lot of time, just to say some of the things that we're doing digitally now is that we have asked students to provide audio commentaries, so they'll do a creative piece and then they'll provide a commentary by audio, and our external listened to some of those audio commentaries and thought that they were more concise and had more clarity than the actual written ones, so that was kind of interesting.
We have examples of all these things, but I don't think we've got time to show you.
No,
anything.
but we will put them on I think Marina could put them on the site for people to look at. Just
I think we should
one-
show one blog there.
Oh yeah, okay.
Just as an example of the kind of peer-to-peer feedback that students were giving each other. This is one of the student blogs, writers' blogs. There are 5 students in this collaborative blog. But I just go down to the bottom. I thought there was something very interesting. One of the students wrote some poems, and then there were comments. Okay, so, and the comments, it says, they're good poems, but if you want to talk about metre, then I'm afraid you're going to have a hard time. There are a few examples of specific metre within the first 2 poems, but not throughout the entire poem. However, you can probably talk about the imagery and what inspired these poems instead. And then the student who wrote the poem said, thanks, Tim. That's not me, this is a student, Tim. When you say metre within the first 2 poems, could you point out where to me so I have a better understanding for myself? And then the student says, strong in stature, muscled shoulders, every curve defined and streamlined. That part is trochaic tetrameter, 4 pairs of syllables per line with the stress on the first syllable in each pair. The same goes for the first 2 lines of the next verse. Underneath an angry tension, bringing forth a vicious roar. The same sort of thing goes on with does a tiger have a stripy bum and is the blobfish always glum? The difference with that poem is that they have a pause in place of the final syllable. So this is a first year student, only a few weeks into the course, and they're already, talking quite precisely about the metre of a poem. So, we were pleased that they were helping each other out in this way. That's just one of numerous examples of student interchanges and peer-to-peer feedback.
Yes.
We'll stop there.
Yep.
Because we've run out of time. Any questions?
Excellent, thank you very much. Can I have a question for Matt? It's a cheeky one.
Yeah.
You
Oh,
said there
come
were
on.
a few flaws, Matt. Can you expand?
The sort of the grading system for the quizzes, it sort of seemed a bit unbalanced because I don't think sort of Tim and Alyson had worked out the kinks yet. There were some sort of quizzes that were quite easy to exploit in terms of people just being able to sort of watch the lecture and then take notes and then be doing the quiz at the same time and they're watching the lecture, which sort of felt like cheating almost. And then there was a sort of quiz that.
May I reply to that first
No,
point?
no, he has to finish first. And
Okay.
that- the other one.
Just the main points I have are kind of really little niggles, to be honest. And then the just sort of getting one question wrong on one quiz would knock 1 or 2 marks off, and then getting a question wrong on another quiz would knock a quarter of the marks off. It seemed like each of the questions had different amounts of points
Okay, so
allocated
it's just
to them.
about quiz design, all right?
Yeah.
It's okay. That's a minor thing.
Yeah.
Just little
Teasing.
niggles that can be, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, he's right. I mean, it needs some work. The quiz questions, I think, definitely. The point about the quiz itself, of course, the quizzes are in themselves, as far as I'm concerned, are utterly meaningless. The point is to get the students to watch the lecture. So I mean, the students don't think of it like that. The students think, oh, I've got to answer these questions and get the quiz right. But from my point of view, the quiz is only there to ensure that they watch the lecture. So the fact that they're doing the quizzes while they're watching the lecture or not, or watching them 2 or 3 times, I think that's great. So for me, that's a big plus, that they're actually engaged in the quizzes used as a way for them to engage with the lecture. So it's not about assessment, it's about learning.
But if it is summatively assessed,
I don't care about the assessment, to be honest.
no, but they do.
They do, but I don't, you see. Yeah, I care about the learning.
I know, but the
It's
thing is, if it
weighted
is
quite
summatively
low
assessed,
compared to the other piece of coursework.
what is the weighting?
Where's the weight?
There was 5% per quiz, and we ran 5 quizzes with 5 online lectures, so it's 25%
So
overall.
25% of the overall mark of a second year module.
Yeah,
They have a point.
very low, very low.
Okay.
You have problems with validity.
Sorry?
You have problems with validity.
I do, or I will.
No, in the way you have explained it, what you are doing is not valid.
According to
for,
whom?
For summative, according to theory, with regarding summative
Well-
assessment. Formative assessment is fine. Summative assessment, you have a problem that how do you know that the student who is there in his or her bed watching this film is the one responding to that
Oh,
quiz?
yeah, I mean,
You had a problem and you mentioned that the quizzes
I-
are not
Balanced.
Yeah.
constructed in a format that doesn't sort of cancel out those more difficult questions with the easier questions. There's an element of
I mean, this is true of every form of assessment, though, isn't it? You
Maybe
know.
they expected us to be more
Yeah,
honest.
yeah. No, I think there is that in terms of identifying. There is the potential for cheating, and we can easily overcome that by running them in the seminars.
Is that the reason why your external has said that you do these quizzes in class?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think
Yes, I
that.
can imagine
that
Yeah,
reason
and
why.
also he did listen to the student feedback like we do. We want to improve it, so we will.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I don't think it improves what I'm interested in. It might improve, you know, the validity of the assessment, and I agree, it almost certainly does. But that's not what I'm interested in, to be honest.
I understand your point of view, but obviously that's the problem with when you are within a system and we are summatively assessing the students, and the students want a fair assessment, so they know what the conditions, and the conditions are the same for everybody.
I suppose it depends what you put as your priority. For me, the priority is the learning. If assessment is the priority, then those are the kind of questions you
Well,
address.
Tim, this is excellent. I mean, this
Yeah.
is fantastic what we've just seen. But what you've just said sounds should be formative to me, not summative. If you
It's all
deliver it.
formative because it's a second year module. It's
No, no,
formative.
it counts for classification.
I agree it counts for classification, but
Yeah.
if you are, I don't believe I'm here at university to classify students. I'm here to make them think, to engage their minds. For me, that's a secondary issue. For me. You know, I agree that's not what everyone thinks. Yeah, but there is space for that point of view. I
However,
believe.
we did engage the students. They were also given lots of tasks to do, lots of reading tasks and hence discussions. And, you know, it brought out a lot of positive things. So I think obviously it was the first time we did it and it has glitches, but, you know, we asked for student feedback because we wanted to hear how it was received, and we will improve it. So we listen to
you can reach a compromise, and as far as you have got formative feedback, then will serve the aim you want to achieve for the students to not only watch it, sort of to think about it and absorb the information, the key elements, and then have the element of summative feedback that has got further constraints, because it has to be something that responds to certain characteristics, and have maybe in class and a particular piece that the students can prepare in advance, and then in class respond to those questions.
Or just makes them pass
Yeah,
or fail.
no,
Instead
I
of
mean-
allocating a mark, make those these pass or fail.
Yeah,
They've got to do it to pass the module, but they don't get the mark. They got to do
well,
it.
if
pass
you,
or
I
fail.
you can cover that just simply by running it in class, which was my first idea, was actually to run it in class. But I actually felt that that it would be more interesting, and I could also make the classes more interesting by not having that running class. I just thought it was a bad way to start my seminars. But having said that, you know, if the external thinks because of, you know, in terms of, you know, validity, then it needs to be running class, we'll run it in class. But that's, for me, is the triumph of assessment over education, rather than the other way around. But that's my point of view.
It's a measure. Assessment is
Show us a
measure.
bit more of the Moodle site so we can have a look at the creative stuff. Just because
This site, well, this is just one of our modules. So this is the module we were talking about. So there's, you know, each week you have a virtual lecture, you have a quiz to follow, various readings, and so on. Sometimes the lectures were provided on the L drive. Sometimes they were directly put into Moodle. So there we've got a video lecture. In fact, that's a video reading of a story and then a video lecture. And then we have various audio lectures and so on. That's a video interview. And so on. And I can maybe show you a little quiz, but this is actually the practice quiz. The other quizzes are closed, so I can't open them publicly. But this is how they would work. This is a practice quiz, so the actual questions are not typical. But you get the idea. Students can just click in boxes. I think they answer the questions. Various types. I'm just answering these randomly, and so on. And then they get some feedback. Yeah. Saying which is right and which is wrong, so on. So that's how they worked.
Okay, any other questions? No? Thank you very much.